when I worked within apparel. And my experience directly with this problem is in a company called Alton Lane, which is menswear. It's made to measure with custom options. And we'll get a little bit more into how my position there evolved and then what I ended up kind of achieving for the brand. But Jessica, did I kind of cover the bases on the intro, or do you want to hear more on certain parts?
No, that's excellent. So what we can do is start answering some of these questions. So why don't you describe for us the problem that Alton Lane was having prior to you introducing them to the solution?
So the key issue with Alton Lane was, number one, they were unable to produce consistent product from the history of a client. So if someone came in and ordered a suit in April and then came back in September and ordered the same suit, it was difficult for them to create the same pattern specifically, even if everything else was the same, all the custom options, the fabric, etc. And the basis for that problem was the fact that they were hand tailoring the patterns. And they had a master tailor at the factory that was actually recording the alterations by hand on the pattern. And so that was the issue that they were facing. It was also not as efficient as it was after the technical solution. And there was waste involved in terms of cutting, time. So efficiency and consistency were the two big issues.
And just to be clear, Alton Lane was collecting their measurements through a body scanner, correct?
There were a few ways they were gathering data on the client. They were scanning customers so that they could record posture. They weren't using that as their primary source of measurements in terms of translating that to the garment. They were actually taking hand measurements in a in-person appointment. Or if the customer was remote and not able to visit a showroom, sometimes they would ask for a sample garment and take measurements off of that garment to record them into their patterning system.
Awesome. So talk to us a little bit about the solution that you proposed.
So just a little bit of history about my evolution at Alton Lane to give you a little context. When I started Alton Lane, I knew the founder before starting, and we were trying to solve similar problems. And so we decided to join up and team up together. And I started in customer service, and that was a great way to learn the business, understand and empathize with what our customers' pain points were, and just kind of get a full scope of what the problems and hurdles were for the business. That didn't last too long because I ended up proving my value and moving into operations, which was primarily processing orders and collecting data. And then from that, I was able to actually build their entire digital supply chain from end to end. So everything from designing and implementing the interface that showroom people used to actually place the orders on the front end, through digital patterns, a custom alteration that we wrote for altering to people's made to measure size, and integrating with the factories on the back end and quality control. So technically speaking, a couple of ways that we address the problems at hand. First, we digitized our patterning process, and that was the real foundation for everything else that followed. Without the computer generated patterns, it's really hard to kind of scale the business and keep everything consistent. Secondly, we made our solution for capturing clients' information and storing their specific sizes digital, so that that was saved with the customer profile. And then in addition to that, we created a solution that actually altered the patterns from the digital pattern. It altered it further to make it specific for the customer's measurements. So anything from sleeve length, the chest measurement, increasing or decreasing the waist, everything, even including posture, shoulder slope, and integrated that into the pattern so that when the factory received the order, the pieces were pre-altered so that when they were sewn, they actually came in that person's size instead of needing alterations on the back end.
So how did that help to make the brand more efficient?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Sorry, how did that help to kind of create more efficiency for Alton Lane? What were some of the changes that they noted with how they previously conducted business, and then how it changed after implementation?
So number one was consistency in product output. So like I mentioned, where a customer would come and order the same suit 6 months later, they would have that exact pattern stored and they would be able to produce it identically, whether it was a different fabric, different options, etc. They could nail the size and keep it consistent. Number two, it allowed the business to scale. So while they were only able to have a certain capacity on the number of orders they could take initially, once that pattern and solution was digitized, that could increase by, let's say, 100-fold. It was exponential. And then third, it allowed them to reduce waste from raw materials that they were ordering and cost of goods sold. Because of the efficiency, computers are really good at doing stuff really fast that it takes humans more time to do, or more thought, or it's just not worth it from a time standpoint.
Now, how did this affect the overall supply chain? Were there any type of new implementation that had to be made? Did they have to buy new software or new machines, or could they just apply this solution into their existing supply chain?
So there's a couple different ways you can approach it. We were already using a lot of the technology that we ended up using. We just used it more uniquely. And it was really a tech-based solution. So we wrote a couple custom scripts to kind of make our software work for our specific uses, but it wasn't anything that was out of the norm in the fashion industry. So we were using Gerber for the patterning software, and we made our ordering process a little bit more elegant by switching from Excel files to a web-based version that was just part of our e-commerce solution that we were using for customers to place orders anyway. It was just a front-facing version of that. And on the back end, the factories didn't have to change anything that they were doing. It was just a new business process so that they recognized how they were receiving the orders and fulfilling them.
So is this solution just for Gerber, or could you replicate the solution with other programs as well?
So Gerber just happened to be the patterning software that we used. It's definitely able to be used with everyone that I'm familiar with. Lectra is the other major one. Optitex is another. I don't know many people who aren't using one of those three in the industry. but yeah, definitely able to be applied to any digital pattern software that you can do.
So I know that you built this solution for menswear. Is it possible that a similar solution could be built for women's wear, given that, you know, women have different shapes and variations of their body types? Is this replicable for women, or is this strictly something that works for men's bespoke?
100% able to do it for women, even kids. Any solution that has apparel-based pattern pieces that are sewn, that has measurements for QC, is a candidate for this system. We used certain measurements on our base pattern and our foundation that were specific to menswear. So for example, we had chest, waist, sleeve length, collar for shirts. Those translate one-to-one to the women's wear. So if you have a digital pattern and you know what your base size is, this solution applies.
That's awesome. And since the creating the solution back then, how has the solution evolved? How has the production cycle evolved? And does your solution account for that evolution?
Yeah, so once the solution was in place, the solution itself didn't change. The company evolved in the sense that they developed more product and added more product offering. So they were adding overcoats, adding sweaters, adding different garment types into the solution, but the solution itself remained constant. The only thing that you have to update is your digital pattern and your base sizes. If you add a new offering entirely, so instead of offering suit jackets and pants, all of a sudden you want to offer overcoats, or let's say we want to go into women's wear and we want to offer a skirt, all we have to do is figure out how those sizes actually manipulate, what the measurements are, and add that in. Once that solution is there, then you can add any style of skirt you want, and it just keeps layering onto that same system.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. So I want to ask you some of these questions that we're getting from everybody. So Kimberly wants to know, did you feed the custom measurements from the website into the software to edit the patterns? And why do you think this is not widely used yet in women's?
Yeah, so the first part of the question is, did we take e-commerce orders and put them directly into our solution? Yes. So we were capturing customer profiles in a couple different methods. One, it could be captured by a showroom professional in a measurement appointment. Two, it could be entered by the customer in an e-commerce order. And both of those would go into the same pattern and manipulate and go through that same solution. It was after the measurement profile was captured, the end result was exactly the same.
Okay. There's another question from Shamika. She wants to know, how accurate is the pattern on the first try? Have you had to do any additional fittings or alterations?
So initially, the results for first try fittings was maybe 50%, let's call it. It wasn't too good in terms of building our brand image, because people had really high expectations for this. We were presenting ourselves as a tech solution, and so people just expected to get really solid results. Once we put our solution in place, so that was when we were still doing it by hand at the factory. Once we put our tech solution in place, that increased to 90% or over. we had super good results, especially as a before and after solution. And I would say in terms of accuracy, if a measurement is wrong, that's kind of gonna be, poor input equals poor output. So if a measurement is wrong, that's kind of gonna be like your hurdle. But if your measurements are right, it's pretty consistent. You're gonna get a good fitting garment.
Now, did you guys, speaking of measurements, did you guys have a system in place that would either flag you if it felt like a measurement was too off of the norm, or how did you account for, let's say, someone just mismeasured or mistyped in what their measurements were? How do you keep it consistent?
Yeah, so one of our iterations on our measurement input or capturing a customer profile was we were noticing sometimes showroom professionals would make a mistake. So they would type 12 because they accidentally hit 1, 2 on the iPad, and they actually meant to type 1 or 2 independently, or they would type 53 and they meant 35. So we actually put a system in place that would say this alteration can alter by 2 inches up or down. Outside of that, you need to pick a different size or do something different. And we built that into all of our available alterations. And then if, say, an alteration could only alter by 2 inches and someone put 12, then it would say, wait a second, there's an issue. Did you mean to put 12? Did you mean, and that will flag it for the showroom professional, and they would be able to fix it or realize that they were outside of the range.
Awesome. And now with like machine learning and all the AI technology we have now, that's probably even easier to do, given that we have a lot of data, and you can put in body charts and size charts and things like that to kind of make sure that you're staying within the means. Gerald wanted to know.
Hang on. I think there is one part of another question that I didn't get to, which was, I think it was from Kimberly. Why isn't it the norm, right? I don't think I addressed that one. I think there's 2 things. Number one, it's a tech solution and there's a hurdle to entry. So you have to be able to commit to it and invest in it in the sense that you realize that your return on your investment is going to be realized over time. And number 2, I think it's a little bit foreign and people don't realize how good it actually can be, and so they don't value it enough.
One of the things I noticed in the fashion industry is the fact that, a lot of brands are not really prepared for tech integration. They're still using Excel, they're using antiquated methods, they don't use any type of 3D CAD for virtual fitting, so they're a little behind. So I can imagine that, it's just a slow process to integrate technology. Gerald wanted to know, did you also do big and tall or plus sizes, and how would it work for these groups?
So I'll answer that in just a second. But adding on to what you said, we still did things with Excel and everything else when we first started. And it really wasn't that slow of a process converting it over. Mm-hmm. And really, you can kind of piecemeal this until you get it fully in place. And you can still input measurements manually. It doesn't have to be part of an e-commerce solution. You can still get the same results by only having certain components of this in place. As long as you have that foundation I mentioned, a digital pattern, and a base measurement table. So those are kind of like the foundation.
So that kind of goes into the question about the big and tall and plus.
Yep.
So as long as you have the base patterns and the kind of, I guess, a grading scale, then you could do big and tall and plus. But go ahead.
So we had a pretty decent size range. For menswear, we offered jacket sizes from size 34 to 60. We did have some instances that fell outside of our outside of that range, and we did figure out solutions for those guys. Sometimes it took a little bit longer, so if we had something that altered outside of our quote normal, that we're flagging an order and saying this alteration is adding 3 inches to the sleeve for someone who's super tall, we would review it on the back end. In other words, we would do a front end quality control to make sure that the pattern looked like it was still sewable before we sent it to the factory.
Okay, so another question that I'm seeing is Shamika wanted to know, I heard that you use a scanner, but did you also do manual measurements? Yes. You did do manual measurements, correct? And she also wanted to know, is there a way to digitally capture measurements in a completely virtual way without having to come in person? Now,
Yeah, awesome question. So in terms of the scanner, when we were using the scanner, it was early days of 3D body scanning. And while the hardware solution was pretty well ironed out in terms of it was a big box that you got into, and there were 32 cameras, and it took a 3D image of your body, and on the screen you could see a wireframe shell of what your body looked like. The software part of it wasn't super elegant, so it would put a measurement in the wrong place, and you would have to manually move it. So like if it couldn't find your waist, or your waist wasn't parallel to the floor, so a lot of men have kind of like a beer belly, let's call it, and they don't wear their pants straight around their waist, so you would have to shift that. I think as 3D body scanning has developed, and those AI maybe solutions are getting better and finding those points more accurately, it's a lot easier to integrate that into the whole process and have it be automatic. But a lot of our measuring on the front end was still manual.
Awesome. Also, to just add on to that, now we're seeing a lot of like mobile scanning apps that are more accurate coming out. I know a lot of people are familiar with mTailor, but there's actually apps that are a little more accurate. So you have My Size ID, allows you to kind of scan your limbs and parts of your body, and it takes that accurate measurement. You have apps that allow you to scan your feet and kind of take a measurement of your feet. Footsie does that. And then you have you do have standalone scanners that are a little more portable and not as large or as cumbersome as previous scanners. So it's becoming more of a mobile experience so that you don't have to leave your home, and so that you can do it completely private.
Yeah, I welcome that new interface into the equation. I don't think it's quite there yet in terms of the accuracy that you get from mobile scans, being able to be a consistent input into the process, into your supply chain. But I think it's definitely coming, and I think it's super exciting. And it eliminates the whole need for having the physical location where you have customers coming in to get measured. And I think that's going to be an awesome day when we can actually take all of that data and put it into the solution. In terms of my experience, there wasn't an app that had figured out scale yet accurately enough to actually take that data and input it directly.
Kimberly wanted to know, why is this not happening for women's wear yet?
Okay.
So maybe you could answer that.
I don't have a good answer to that. I think women's wear is different fundamentally and psychologically from menswear. I think women shop differently. I think they have a bigger range of clothing. I think the patterns are more dynamic. So styles are changing a lot more frequently. Trends are happening, whereas menswear is a lot more consistent and men are just more predictable as shoppers. So I think that's the reason we've started at menswear, as being able to offer this as a solution. I think, that being said, it's certainly going to happen for women's wear in the near future. And it's just a matter of finding brands that value this solution and are willing to invest in it in order to see the actual long-term results.
And let me ask you this. So if a brand, an existing brand right now, wanted to implement this technology, what do those steps look like?
So first of all, like I said, you need to have your patterns be digital. The process of actually having digital patterns will give you everything on the technical end that you need in terms of a base measurement table and a size range. And once you do your grade, you automatically have all of that information. In addition to that, there's an algorithm that we developed, but it wasn't anything outside of what a typical tech designer could have come up with. And then at the factory, you have to have someone who can integrate with what you're doing. So once you have your measurement profile, it goes through the digital pattern and manipulates your alterations. You have to be able to have a factory who can pick up that output and know how to implement that into a sewn garment.
Now, is that something that you could help train the factory? Let's say if someone says, hey, I want to implement this, I work with this factory, would you mind going out there, spending a couple days or two to set this up so that we can have this forever?
Yeah, I actually did that in a factory at China and a factory at Thailand. All that we needed was them to be willing to work with us and figure out a new process for how they were going to pick up the orders. Both of those factories already used Gerber and had Gerber plotters that they could take our pattern data and plot it out and cut the pattern, or take that pattern data and put it onto a machine and automatically cut the pieces. And they were both super willing to work with us because they saw this as the future of the industry and keeping ahead of the curve.
Awesome. And then is there any more questions? Feel free. Now we can really open it up. If you have a question, feel free to pop up your video and ask. Don't be shy. Also, if you guys want a copy of this case study that's on the screen, let me know. Just drop your email. I'll be happy to send this to you. This is all about Seth's work and, just the results of it and everything. So if you're interested, feel free to send it. Oh, we have another question. How long did it take to build a new process and what did it cost?
So we had a little bit of a false start when we were doing it. We had hired a consultant to come and help. And that set us back a few months because, long story short, that solution ended up failing in the long run. So that was the opportunity for me to pick up the ball. And I would say it took us about 9 months from start to finish, only because it was brand new territory. It was something that we were kind of still figuring out for ourselves. If I were to do it again today, let's say for a different company or a women's wear brand, I think that timeline can be condensed to around 3 months, with 6 months being a longer lead project that was more complex. And cost. Again, it's a tech project. It's a custom solution. I think that you have to approach it that way. I think the entry point is around $50,000. And then you kind of have as you increase into complexity, you have to account for that.
Also, we have another question. Did you have Gerber auto adjust measurements, and what platform did you use to build your website?
Okay. We had Gerber auto adjust measurements in a way, but we controlled it. So I'm familiar with what you're referring to. We used it not in the sense that Gerber presents it as a solution, like we used it modified to our specifications so that we could actually put in a hierarchy of this alteration happens before this one, or if these two alterations happen, this is how they interact. That gave us better results on the back end in terms of an actual sewable garment. And we used Magento to power our e-commerce solution. It was, at the time, there was Magento Community. I think there still is, which is free. So that was a great intro point. And then they have more of a commercial solution that you can grow into once you have the volume.
Also, now with so much data on body measurements and body scans and all that, would it be possible to kind of collect that information and put it into the system so that you can kind of accurately predict, you know, shapes if you were going to do it for women or even for men who have various shapes? Would you be able to utilize that information now?
Yeah, I think you can kind of start to develop a bell curve, as it were, for each of the measurements and try to predict where your standard customer is going to fall, and on the front end develop your patterns around that initially. That way maybe you're not having as many drastic alterations on the back end.
Awesome. Okay, any other questions, or does anybody, one more question. What would you do differently if you did it again today?
So first of all, I would try to find a scanning solution that could automate the front end. So the part that we were still doing pretty much manually is we were still taking hand measurements of customers and entering that data to form their measurement profile. I think if that piece can be automated, I know a few solutions that can take a full 3D body scan with accurate consistency on the output in about 30 seconds. And if I could take that data and put it straight into my digital pattern and see that result almost instantaneously, that would be a huge speed thing, in the fact that I don't have to take that hour appointment. I don't have to have the customer physically in front of me. And that gives me greater mobility and hopefully super accurate results and super quick measurement profiles.
Awesome. So if there's no more questions, Seth, thank you so much for this information. Please let everyone know how they can get in touch with you. For those who submitted their emails, I'll be sending you this case study so that you can take a look at some of the results. And yeah, make sure that you stay tuned for our future events. And with Fit Tech 101, Seth comes to the events. And yeah, Seth, let them know how they can reach you, or drop your email in there.
Yep. So I'm typing my email into the chat right now. Anyone is welcome to email, and love to hear from you. Thanks, guys, for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, and we hope you have a great day. Share everyone's emails. Oh, thank you.